Hi, starting with the 6th December first editorial, which is the heart of the problem. This editorial speaks about the Art of Asia conference. I've already dealt with the details of Art of Asia conference in my other video, which I will link it in the description box. Now, the important points in this editorial is that it says that India and Afghanistan focus their concerns on the terrorism, that is, the cross border terrorism emanating from the Pakistan, and also Afghanistan made it clear that the development in Pakistan is meaningless and unsustainable without the peace. So, in order to maintain the peace, Pakistan should end its support to the terror groups such as Haqqani Network, Lashkar-e-Taiba, etc. And Afghanistan president also dared Pakistan to use its proposed development grant to the Afghanistan to fight the terror in its own soil. Now, coming to the India and Afghanistan strategy in dealing with the Pakistan, see, if there's lack of engagement with the Pakistan, in for short run, it might put pressure on Pakistan. But in the long run, both the countries, Afghanistan and India, they lose the limited leverage on the Pakistan. And also, this will lead to a more closer ties of Pakistan with China and Russia. And as seen already, Afghanistan is moving more closer to the Central Asia, and India is exploring other options with multilateral groupings with the East and South. But such steps does not lead us to anywhere if our main concern is to bring the peace in the region. So therefore, it's very much essential to maintain ties or continue the engagement with the Pakistan. Now, coming to the measures taken by India and Afghanistan to strengthen their relationship, I've dealt with the other measures in the video mentioned in the description box. Now, the remaining points are that India and Afghanistan, they are focusing on the land trade through the Chabahar port, which is in Iran, and there is also dedicated air corridor between the Kabul and New Delhi. And so these are the other measures taken by the India and Afghanistan. So this is the brief of the editorial. Now moving on to the second editorial. The next editorial is comparing apples and oranges. This speaks about the new ranking scheme, which is the National Institutional Ranking Framework announced by the Ministry of Human Resources and Development. The reason for coming out with the own ranking scheme is because of the unfairness of comparing the Indian institutions with that of the Western institutions. As a result, even our very elite centrally funded institutions like IIT were not doing well in any of the accepted global ranking schemes like QS World University Rankings, Times Higher Education World University Rankings, Shanghai Rankings, etc. Coming to our higher education scenario, even though gross enrollment ratio is below 25%, the higher education system turns out almost 8 to 10 million graduates with 50,000 institutions under 800 universities and 1.5 million teachers. Limitations of the new. We should appreciate India for coming out with its own ranking system, but there are few limitations in its new ranking system. The first one is in categorizing the institutions. There are few institutions with a very sharp focus on narrow areas like information technology or space technology, and they are considered as universities. And other institutions which has a broad base in all domains like engineering, science, and humanities, they are considered as engineering institution. And second limitation is that the exercise was carried out largely by the members of the central government institution, leaving out the state government institutions, which constitutes almost 90% of the total institutions in our country. So this is very unfair to leave out the state universities. And the next is the unfair comparison between the central universities like IIT and the state universities, given the huge difference between their funding and the resources. So central universities have an advantage of better funding and better resources available to them. So given this scenario, it's very unethical and unscientific to compare the central institutions with those of the state, and it also may demoralize the state universities. Now, coming to the suggestions, the first suggestion is that while comparing the state and central university, we have to apply performance per rupee logic. That is, evaluating the performance compared to the every rupee spent. And other suggestion is that to have two separate ranking, one ranking for the central and private universities, and the separate ranking system or ranking scheme for the state universities. Now this brings us to the end of this editorial. Moving on to the next editorial. It's lessons from an intimate enemy. The writer speaks about the lessons the US and Cuba should learn from each other. The US has granted civil and political rights to its citizens, and not granting socio-economic rights, whereas Cuba has granted socio-economic rights like right to health, food, security, literacy, education to job, and not focusing on the civil and political rights. The South Africa, which received the cooperation of Cuba during its war, also followed the principles of Cuba and granted socio-economic rights to its citizens and not focusing much on the civil and political rights. So there is like a failure in human rights from the both the countries. So human rights cannot be only civil and political rights or only social and economic rights. It's a combination of both. See, like we need the freedom to speak out, but also we need a job, a doctor, a decent school to a citizen. So these two countries, US and Cuba, should learn lessons from each other in order to grant complete human rights to its citizen. Now in the description box I've shared a video of the Nelson Mandela speaking about their cooperation with the Cuba. This is a very inspiring talk. I suggest you watch it once. Then next editorial is the Nowhere People. In this editorial, the writer speaks about the environmental refugees. Environmental refugees are nothing but the people who are displaced due to famine, drought, rising sea level, and other natural disasters. According to the Internal Displacement Monitoring Center, which is an international body reviewing the trends of internal displacement, around 25 million people are being displaced annually by disasters since 2008. The UN Refugee Convention 1951, it grants certain rights to people fleeing the persecution because of race, religion, nationality, affiliation to a particular social group or political opinion. The rights granted are non-discrimination, non-penalization, or non-refoulement. But the UN Refugee Convention does not give refugee status to the people migrating due to environmental disasters, whom we call it as environmental refugees. So they haven't granted any such rights under UN Refugee Conventions. Therefore, they are denied from the rehabilitation and compensation. The recent Paris Agreement has created a task force to build upon the existing work and make recommendations for addressing the climate change. But this task force is meaningless for two reasons, because it doesn't have any binding authority, and the other reason is that there are no details provided on the operation, functions, and funding. Coming to the suggestions, the draft of Paris Agreement before Conference of Parties 21 provided for the climate change displacement coordination facility to target the organized migration, plan the relocation of displaced person, and also to secure the emergency relief and arranging the compensation. This is more meaningful than the task force. Therefore, it's very much essential to go on with the climate change displacement coordination facility than the task force. Now coming to the other suggestions is that either to expand the existing UN Refugee Convention to include the environmental refugees, or come up with a separate international treaty framework that recognizes the environmental refugees. And there's also very much need to develop the policies to manage the loss and damage by addressing the climate change induced displacement. And there's also need to provide the technical and capacity building support to the national and local initiatives tackling the displacement. This brings us to the end of today's editorial. If you have found this video useful, please like and subscribe to my channel, and also please give me your valuable feedback. Thank you.